Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Robert Costa, coming to you from our Washington, D.C. bureau. We begin tonight with the latest from our CBS News Battleground Tracker poll. The poll shows the Republican Party is still projected to pick up the House majority, but it's by no means guaranteed. This is a tightening midterm campaign. For now, the poll shows Republicans could win 223 seats. That would be enough to retake the House, but that number of seats is down for the second month in a row in our CBS News surveys, from a projected 226 seats in August and 230 in July. We are now joined tonight by three of my CBS News colleagues. Congressional correspondent Nikole Killion, she's here with me at the desk. Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett is also here in Washington. And CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us from our Studio 57 in New York. Let's start with Anthony. New CBS News polling is out today, looking into the January 6th investigation and how it could affect the November elections. Anthony, what are you seeing in the new data?
Hey there, Bob. Let me show you one thing right off the bat, because I think it speaks a lot to what we're seeing with regard to the January 6th hearings, and that is the investigations. We ask people, okay, is it more likely to affect your vote towards the Democrats, towards the Republicans, or not make a difference? On balance, by 40 to 31, people say, okay, it's more likely to make them vote for the Democrat. Now, I'll tell you, a lot of these people were Democrats, are Democrats, so they're probably voting Democratic anyway. This isn't the most important thing. The economy still is. Abortion is still critical. It describes a lot of what you said at the intro with that tightening race. But the thing that this does, Bob, is it keeps Donald Trump in the news. So there's this indirect effect, if you will. And there, I think this is important, because more people by 12 points say they're going to the polls to oppose Donald Trump rather than to support him. But look at this. It's a majority, bare majority, he's still on their minds. So he's the former president. He's still on the minds of voters going forward. And that's how this all sort of ties up in that, Bob.
Anthony, what else on the Trump factor is coming apparent to you in the polling? Well,
there's a couple of things. One is that when you talk about January 6th, you talk about the documents that you've reported on, as others have, down at Mar-a-Lago. You know, people say that a former president, President Trump, should be treated equally, like everybody, and equally under the law, but not allowed any special exemptions from the law. That's really important because it sets a context. This goes across parties, Democrats, Republicans, everybody, treated equally. And then the other part here is, look at the pressure, to some extent, on Republican candidates out now. Back to these campaigns we're talking about here, 65% of Republicans say it's important for the party to be loyal to Donald Trump. Well, that means if they try to move to the middle, if they try to sort of temper what they're saying, try to appeal to more independent voters, they've got Republicans behind them saying, no, we want you to be loyal to the president. And I'll tell you, behind this, these people vote more. These folks vote more. So it's really important. It's that Trump factor. He's a net negative overall, but he's really motivating for the Republican base, Bob.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you as always. Major Garrett, we're going to turn to you on this. If you're talking to Republican sources and they're looking at the final few weeks of this campaign, based on that polling data, based on your reporting, how is Trump going to factor in? Will he be a presence on the trail in swing states or not?
He'll be a presence even if he's not there, Bob, because as that polling data that Anthony just summarized shows, former President Trump is on the minds of voters, Democrats and independents and Republicans, in very different ways for all three political categories. Republicans think about that loyalty test for fellow Republicans. Independents are thinking, am I more interested in my evaluation of the Biden agenda or my satisfaction or dissatisfaction with that, or the prospect of Trump-influenced Republicans or a Trump candidacy for 2024 as I think about my midterm vote? And sort of Democrats, of course, think a lot about former President Trump, see him as a threat to democracy and these overall issues of their own sense of balance in political power. So they're already against the former President Trump and Republicans. So he is a part of this midterm election, unusually so, because as you well know, Robert, midterm elections after a change in power, which we had in 2020, always about satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the new president. Now it's going to be about that, Biden, but also significantly about former President Trump.
Major, that's right. I mean, it's usually a referendum on the president. But, Nikole, as much as President Trump is front and center this week in Washington, there's a Wednesday hearing of the January 6th committee. Is he front and center when House Republicans are framing this election? You were with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy just a few days ago in Pennsylvania. What have you learned?
Yeah, and I think that's what's fascinating in terms of looking at some of those numbers that Anthony just presented us, and that 47% of those registered voters said that this is not about Trump. And I think whether you talk to Republicans or Democrats who are campaigning this cycle, to a certain extent, they don't want this to be about Trump. When I was at that event, as you mentioned, with the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, as they rolled out their midterm agenda, there was not one mention of the former president, not in the speeches and not in
even
our
praise.
interviews.
So they're avoiding the topic a little bit.
A little bit. And so, and also, similarly, I think when you talk to some, Democratic strategists, I mean, certainly this could be an easy way for them to gain points on the board, right, in terms of, bringing up the former president and some of these issues and legal troubles that he finds himself in. But also, many Democrats I've talked to are kind of trying to stay clear of that as well, because, again, I think for both parties, this is really kind of coming down to those kitchen table issues, the economy, again, abortion, obviously, in light of the situation with Roe versus Wade being overturned. So I think that is more so where we see the respective parties trying to steer the conversation and more so away from the former president. But we'll see with these hearings. And again, once the committee puts out their report at some point, in the next couple of weeks, potentially by the end of the year, we'll see if that kind of resonates or has any impact.
Major, that's where the Republicans in the House want to steer the conversation. But Democrats, Vice President Harris, President Biden, they've talked about democracy. You've just co-written a terrific book about democracy.
Thank you.
How is democracy coming into this conversation, even as the parties take their own respective positions on the message?
In ways that we've never seen before, Bob, in this midterm election cycle, questions about either the fragility or strength and resilience of the American democratic experiment are on voters' minds in ways never before. They're competing with the two biggest issues, inflation / the economy, that's one, and abortion rights, privacy rights, that's two. But right behind it in most surveys, and in some surveys, even exceeding those two issues, is this concern about the strength and the continuance of American democracy. So it's out there. And getting back to your first question, Bob, on whether or not former President Trump is the driving issue or not in statewide races for the Senate, whether he's there or not, his endorsed candidates are the Republican nominees, and they're faring so far poorly. In New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, less than expected in terms of strong showing for J.D. Vance in Ohio. Blake Masters in Arizona also running behind. Adam Laxalt in a competitive race for sure. In Nevada, maybe the odds-on favorite there, but none of them are performing up to expectations. And so whether or not former President Trump campaigns in those states or is part of the TV campaigns that most viewers see in their living rooms or on their smartphones in digital advertising, those endorsed candidates carry the Trump mystique, for better or for worse, and so far are underperforming.
And in addition, on this democracy front, Nikole, there are sometimes unexpected variables that come into the midterm conversation. New information comes to light. We're all waiting to see what the January 6th committee does on Wednesday at 1 p.m., perhaps its final hearing before the midterm elections. And we learned a little bit of new information over the weekend from Denver Riggleman, the former senior technical advisor to the committee. He appeared on 60 Minutes. Let's take a listen.
Did it hit you at one point that this is way bigger than it appeared in the beginning?
Absolutely. So you get a real aha moment when you see that the White House switchboard had connected to a rioter's phone while it's happening. That's a pretty big aha moment. You get an aha
Wait a minute. Someone in the White House was calling one of the rioters while the riot was going on?
On January 6th, absolutely.
And you know who both ends of that call?
I only know one end of that call.
Nikole, what are your sources close to the committee saying about that Riggleman interview, as well as about Wednesday's hearing?
Well, certainly there has been a little concern about Denver coming forward. Obviously, he used to work for the committee, and so the committee has acknowledged, and I think they also acknowledged to 60 Minutes that, he certainly participated with respect to the investigation, but that they have also been, it goes beyond just kind of the things that he looked into, right? So from that standpoint, I think the committee feels that, hey, we're doing our due diligence as well. He's not the only guy kind of doing the main investigating work with respect to the committee. And stay tuned to see what we have. We understand that it's possible that we could see some new documentary footage, perhaps some new clips with respect to Roger Stone, and that the committee may take a deeper dive into more specifically kind of how far some of these discussions went back, that they might have predated, the election in terms of whether it was Roger Stone or Steve Bannon, to the extent that they did feel that the president would put up some kind of fight to the election results. And so I think that that could be some type of narrative that we see emerge out of the committee. We also know that they have been looking through those Secret Service texts, some of which were missing. So perhaps we could get more information on that front in terms of what the committee has learned. But again, we do expect from members that we will hear more new information to a certain extent. But on the same token, they do have to start wrapping things up. So whether or not this puts a bow on everything, we probably won't know until we see that final report by the end of the year.
Major, we also heard from the vice chair of the committee, Liz Cheney, at the Texas Tribune Festival. Both of us were in Austin. Let's take a quick listen to what she said there.
Let me say that any interaction that Donald Trump has with the committee will be under oath and subject to penalties of perjury.
Major, as you've been focusing on the issue of democracy and the midterm elections, how much is Cheney's voice inside the Republican Party resonating with fellow Republicans?
Not nearly as much as she would like it to, Robert, that's for sure. Liz Cheney is going to every Republican who will listen to her, and there are fewer and fewer of them in the Republican conference. But in the broad Republican conversation generally, she's saying something very large is at stake here. And what's at stake is this party, meaning the Republican Party's continued commitment to what the Constitution says and how elections are conducted and the believability therein. And she keeps saying there is no evidence, there hasn't been evidence, no one who's questioned this election has produced evidence to suggest anything other than what happened. President Biden won, and lots of Republicans won in tight congressional races and in state legislative races. Those are the realities. But she tells her Republican colleagues, as long as you continue to indulge former President Trump's continuous and baseless lies about 2020, you are undermining this party's commitment to the Constitution and the democratic experiment in this country as we have known it up until now. And she would like Republicans to rally around at least that part of what she thought was a universal Republican idea and agenda. So far, it hasn't been universal, and she's trying to dislodge former President Trump's hold over the party on this one particular question. She's no fan of the Biden administration or its agenda, but on this, she wants Republicans to disengage themselves from former President Trump and get back to first principles. She's not having nearly the success she would like to.
And we'll hope to get back to both of you soon. Nikole Killion and Major Garrett, thank you very much.